Welcome back, everyone, to the next episode of America Unplugged. I am your host, Manny, and I'll admit, I'm very careful about talking about the pandemic and the vaccines because A, there's a lot of false information going around, and B, well, I'm worried about the repercussions of the information that I'm going to share. But this is all straight from the CDC. It's all published in the New England Journal of Medicine, so I suppose it's public news. Nothing I'm sharing isn't accessible. It's not confidential. So I'll pray that there aren't repercussions. Anyways, I want to talk about the BNT-162 Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine and why it's a very bad idea to politicize this. Okay? Now, I know that I've been giving the left a lot of heat lately, and as I mentioned before, I call the sides out as I see it. In this case, I'm going to call out Republican Congressman Steve Stivers for attempting to incentivize the stimulus check by making it contingent upon receiving the COVID-19 vaccine. First of all, that's wrong on so many levels if you look at the science. Never mind the fact that there haven't been any studies that included the pediatric population, no one under the age of 16. Never mind the fact that there haven't been any studies on pregnant women. Never mind the fact that none of the studies included anyone who was immunocompromised. No one knows what the effects may be for those three specific populations. And when you're following the science, when you have evidence-based scientific studies, you have to take into account patient safety. So it's unethical to include anyone who may be predisposed to higher risk in a study. And by that logic, it's also unethical to try to persuade people to get the vaccine, particularly for those three populations that I mentioned, without there being any evidence on the potential effects of getting the vaccine. That's flat out wrong. So you are advocating for herd immunity. And again, if you follow the science, herd immunity suggests that 70 to 90% of a population should be vaccinated in order to achieve herd immunity. So you're not taking into account, again, children, pregnant women, and the immunocompromised in your goal for herd immunity. Now, moving on to the actual vaccine. So this is again on a CDC website, and I can go ahead and post the links for you to do your own research. Now, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices interim recommendation for use of the Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine, United States, December 2020. So this was published December 18th, 2020. And in a nutshell, the FDA issued an emergency use authorization for the Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. Again, they recommended the vaccine for the population that's 16 years or older because there haven't been any studies for the pediatric population or pregnant women or the immunocompromised. But that information you can find on the actual Pfizer website with the clinical trials. Now, the reason why they approved the emergency authorization for the Pfizer vaccine, they literally have it highlighted on the page, is that consistent high efficacy, greater than or equal to 92%, was observed across age, sex, race, and ethnic categories and among persons with underlying medical conditions. Efficacy was similarly high in a secondary analysis, including participants both with or without evidence of previous SARS-CoV-2 infection. Let's dive into that for a second. Now, there are some inconsistencies that I'm concerned about. As a public health major, I had to become well versed with clinical trials, the different types of clinical trials, in this case, this being an RCT, a randomized control trial, where they had a placebo group and a group who received the vaccination, and then measured its effectiveness, or lack of. So I have my concerns, and it isn't so much with Pfizer as it is the vaccine and the pandemic being politicized. It shouldn't have become a political thing. Now, if you look at the original study, there were a total of 548 participants. So they divided the group in half. 21,720 people receiving the vaccination and 21,728 people receiving the placebo. So the placebo group basically didn't receive the vaccine. And in these trials, no one knows who receives or doesn't receive the vaccine. The participants don't know, in order to sort of even things out, right? Because we wouldn't want participants knowing what they received and then they'll have a change in behavior in order to offset the results. So no one knew whether or not they received the vaccine. They pretty much continued their everyday lives. Obviously, if they were in the US, it was an international study, but a huge portion resided in the US. They took into account social distancing measures. And from there, they concluded, based off of who was vaccinated and who was not vaccinated, who received the placebo, that the BNT162 Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine was deemed effective in the mitigation of COVID-19. So back to the numbers. So the original listed 43,548 participants, and the analysis that is posted on the CDC website lists 36,523 participants. I'm not sure where the discrepancy is, but we're missing a little bit over 7,000 participants from the original published study to what is posted on the CDC, which in some cases, in all fairness, there are exclusion criteria for participants in the dataset. But what concerns me is that the infection rate remained the same. So in the original number, the 43,548 participants, out of those who were vaccinated, there were 8 confirmed COVID cases after following them for 7 days, and 162 confirmed COVID cases in the placebo group, being tracked 7 days after receiving their second dose. Those numbers stayed exactly the same when the number of participants was reduced by a little bit over 7,000. 7,025 to be exact, with a total of 36,523 participants. Within that number, 18,198 received the vaccine and 18,325 received the placebo, but the amount of people infected in both groups remained the same after deducting 7,000 people, give or take. Now, that part concerns me because I have a hard time believing that the number of people infected didn't change with the omission of 7,000 participants in the original study. On top of that, as I mentioned, in the original study, there were 21,720 participants who received the vaccination and 21,728 who received the placebo. So there was a difference of 8 participants. In the new revised numbers of the study, there was a difference of 127 participants. Now, I'm throwing a lot of numbers out there and you're probably asking why this is relevant. Well, let's look at the infection rate for the people who received the vaccination versus the people who received the placebo 7 days after receiving the second dose. Within a vaccinated population, there were a total of 8 people who got infected. And in the placebo group, there were 162. So initially, people would say, oh wow, that's a significant number more. But this is a case where we need to focus on percentages. So in the vaccinated population, a total of 8 people out of a total of 18,198 people getting reinfected with COVID-19 after 7 days from receiving the second dose, that is a 0.04% infection rate. So not even half of a percent. Okay? Now, within the placebo group, from the 162 out of the 18,325 participants who received the placebo, there was a 0.8% infection rate. So again, not even a percent. There isn't even a whole percentage difference between the vaccinated versus unvaccinated groups when it comes to reinfection. Now, if you flip it the other way, because when these types of things become politicized, they like playing number games. So if you flip it the other way, you can conclude that within both populations, 99% of the population that participated in the RCT, the randomized control trial, did not contract COVID-19 after being tracked for 7 days, not taking into account the variance of 127 participants between the placebo and the vaccinated group, and not taking into account the 7,025 participants that were omitted from the original study, even though the reinfection rate remained the same. So I'm not sure how they came to the conclusion that the Pfizer BNT-162 COVID-19 vaccine was deemed effective in preventing the contraction of COVID-19. I'm not sure how they came up with that. And again, it doesn't take into account the population that's under the age of 16, pregnant women, or the immunocompromised. We don't know. I'm not saying that in a good way or a bad way. Simply, we don't know what effects it would have within that population. And circling back to Republican Representative Steve Stivers, who suggested incentivizing the stimulus package, making it contingent upon receiving a COVID-19 vaccine in order to achieve quote-unquote herd immunity, that's irresponsible and it's unethical. This is why we don't politicize these types of things. So as always, I'll cite my resources in the description section of the video if you're watching on YouTube, and on the information section of the podcast if you're listening in. And again, I hope I don't get into trouble with this, that there aren't repercussions. This is all public information posted on the Centers for Disease Control website and also on the New England Journal of Medicine. So I'm just reporting my findings. If anyone knows why there were a total of 7,025 participants omitted, please, by all means, let me know. Feel free to comment or reach out to me. I'm not suggesting corruption. I'm not suggesting that Pfizer did something shady. I'm simply curious as to why there were 7,025 participants removed from the study, although the infection rate remained the same 7 days after the participants received either the vaccine or the placebo. I'm sincerely curious. Please let me know. Anyways, this is Manny with America Unplugged, signing out.